Don't you guys love it? Because you're a real estate agent and you see all these other agents and they're making their jobs look so simple. And everybody thinks that all we really need to do is be nice, be friendly, talk to clients, go out and look at these fabulous, nice houses, go home, write an offer, do some paperwork, get an acceptance, deliver the keys, and then we get these like huge commission checks, right? And I think that's what the general public thinks. And sometimes other agents make it look really, really easy, but we know that there's actually a lot more than just, these simple steps. There's a lot that goes into seeing a transaction all the way to the end. I mean, you have, practical things about, what you need to do next with your paperwork. And you also have to get through all these disclosure items, and you need to be able to counsel your client. And you just need to know how to put all the things into motion as far as what your steps are. And then you still need to make sure that you're, you're negotiating and taking the proper steps to get to a close. So it's really not as easy as some people think it is. So Amber and I hope that this little presentation that we're going to give you will give you guys a little bit of guidance. And I think what we'll do is we're probably going to start with some pretty basic stuff, and then we'll get a little bit more detailed as we go. Okay. And so these are our topics. These are the things we're going to talk about as we go. The first one is that communication is very key. You need to have timely responses, attention to details, and anticipation of problems, because I think that that's a large part of our job, in anticipating problems.
Yeah, and Rebecca, as I had mentioned, it just came up the other day that sometimes my form of communication that I think is best for my clients isn't exactly how they want it. So, for example, somebody like in my mom and dad's age group, they're not going to go and be excited about getting a text or even an email or a DocuSign from me. They're still old school. They would like to have a phone call and either have me mail docs or hand deliver them. And so I just always I've added that in as a little caveat on my list, that I want to be sure and ask my clients, what is the best form of communication for you in a timely situation if I need to get you immediately? And so then I will also be sure and follow up with an email as well. I know we'll touch base on that a little bit later. Thanks, Rebecca.
Yeah. Thank you. The other thing to remember, everybody, is teamwork makes the dream work. And so you have to remember that you're all in this together. Everybody is working to get to the common goal, which is a closed transaction. I remember when I first started doing real estate, my mentor, a broker that I worked with when I was very newly licensed, he told me to always get along with the agent on the other side, if at all possible, because you definitely need to work together to get that transaction done. Now, I know sometimes that can be a challenge because we deal with a bunch of different personalities, whether it's an agent or a client or a vendor or a lender or anything like that. But you all still need to remember that we're all working together to get to the common goal. And so that's really important. We're also going to talk about some immediate first steps, and say that you get assigned acceptance on your contract, and you're a newer agent and you don't really know what to do next. We're going to kind of go through and touch briefly on what the immediate steps are that you need to follow once you have an accepted offer. Okay. Most of this presentation is going to be from the buyer's side point of view, but I still think that what we're going to be teaching you and telling you is going to be applicable to even if you have a listing also, because a lot of these steps are the same.
And I think too, Rebecca, talking about expectations, that setting those expectations not only for ourselves and what our actual active duties are, but also getting our team involved and saying, hey, here's my expectation for my transaction coordinator, my expectation for my title company, and just getting, my expectations for the lenders, just to be sure and have a game plan set out. Because I always feel like, to make the football analogy, that we're the quarterbacks of the team.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. We're kind of like, we know the plan, but sometimes I think other people, especially newer buyers and newer sellers, they may not know what the next steps are. And so as long as we guide them and actually tell them what to expect, it makes things go a lot smoother, I find. We're also going to talk about getting through investigations and contingencies, and talk a little bit about what tools you might use in order to negotiate through some objections or negotiate through your requests after you go through your inspections, okay? We're also going to touch quickly on working with your transaction coordinator and how to track your completed paperwork and why that's very important. And we're going to talk about successful completion of the paperwork and your final closing steps. And so that's going to be the things that need to get done before you actually see your paycheck, okay? Because there are certain steps that you need to continue on with during each transaction, and they're always the same. And then we're going to talk about maintaining our professional standards, even when things get stressful. And we'll finish up with some other advice about handling objections. Okay, but let's start out first with communication is key. Okay, and I love this graphic that we use. Dance like nobody is watching, but text and email like it will be read in court one day. Okay. So we already talked a little bit about asking our clients about how they prefer to communicate, and always just keep in mind that, you know, you want to go with what they set. It's their flow. And so like Amber said, if they're older, obviously they may not do computers, or they may not do DocuSign, or they may need more explanation. So just definitely kind of set the stage for how you're going to communicate with your clients. Okay. You're always going to treat your clients the same way every time. You need to maintain your professionalism. And if you do business and you're starting to do repeat business, you'll get into this flow where you're going to have answers for your certain questions, and you're going to know how to say things all the time. And you'll be able to just maintain a certain standard of professionalism and how you're communicating with your clients. Okay. You always want to be responsive so that your clients and colleagues aren't waiting for information. There's really nothing worse than asking for a question from another agent and not getting a reply, right? I hate that. Or asking, you know, a string of questions, 3 questions, and then the other agent only gives you 1 answer, right? And so try to be responsive, you know, try to set expectations for when you're going to answer questions and when other people should be getting back to you. Okay, sometimes if I find that another agent isn't getting back to me, I will say to them, hey, when will you get back to me with that answer? Right? Because then they have to answer me with that. So I know that I've set an expectation for a reply. Right?
I also heard, sorry to interrupt, Rebecca, I also
Okay.
heard at the regional convention that, you know, if we can make life much simpler for that other agent, even if it seems like I'm doing, quote, all the work, I've found that it's a better way for me to be proactive. So if we have discussed something and we need to do, for example, in Colorado, a post-closing occupancy agreement, for example, this weekend, I just generated it with the offer because I knew that we'd be doing that. If we come across something along the lines and there needs to be an amend extend done, or we need to follow up with somebody, I just do it, even if in the back of my head, I'm thinking that should be the other agent's job. I feel like even though I'm working as a buyer's agent, I still am working for the transaction to make sure that it's successful and we get to closing.
Exactly. I love that. Yeah. I always try to do something that's helpful.
Yep.
So if you are having important conversations, whether it's with your client or with another agent or a lender or a vendor, or if you're in a meeting and a lot of important stuff is happening, we really highly advise that you summarize your important your conversations and your meetings in writing, in an email. You can say, hey, thanks for meeting me at the property. This is what we just talked about, right? Because I find that if you're doing back and forth with the other side, obviously if it's a material fact that's going to affect the value or the desirability of the property, you need to remember that a lot of that back and forth, the client should definitely be seeing and signing off on. And so we can talk a little bit about more of that later, but I always think that it's great to kind of summarize something that's important, okay? And make sure it's in writing. And then you just always want to be careful and just remember liability reasons, you know, that we want to do this type of stuff is because we definitely want to maintain our professionalism and we want to put things in writing, because heaven forbid something goes south and you don't have any proof that you maybe did talk about something with someone and they're denying it or whatever. You just really want to always remember that the reason we're doing these things is to kind of maintain our our professionalism and our liability. So we're not liable for anything, hopefully. Okay. Don't put anything into writing that could potentially be used against us in a lawsuit. That's just kind of common. We really want to be careful with our written communications. Okay.
And I've also suggested too, Rebecca, that if any agents have something that they are going to be sending to another agent and they'd like me to reread it, just a real quick, hey, Amber, do you think this is appropriate? I'm available. And so, and I know that you're that way as well, Rebecca. Would rather have another set of eyes on it, take a look at it. And those of you that are working with mentors, perfect opportunity just to make sure, hey, we're all good.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh, there's nothing worse than getting worked up and firing off an email that you later regret. Okay,
Exactly.
so just if you ever have a doubt in your mind, an inkling of doubt that you perhaps shouldn't send it, then take a step back and don't send it until you think about it a little bit more, right? Okay.
Yes.
Some practical advice. Recently, I've come across a situation where an agent called me and said, hey, I didn't know that the listing agent was going to call my buyer's lender. Is the listing agent allowed to call my buyer's lender? And so I thought that it would be good to just go over really quickly who talks to who in a transaction, especially if you're newer. You may not kind of know, who talks to who. It's not like no one's disallowed to talk to people, except for, of course, most appraisers don't like to be talked to. But so let's go through this really quick. Everybody's going to be working together. We all know that the title company is the neutral third party, and the title company takes instructions from the seller's side and the buyer's side. And so all those instructions from both sides have to match in order for the title company to move forward. Okay, so the title company is actually talking to everybody. The title company is talking to both agents. The title company may be talking to both clients. They're definitely talking to the lender and the funding department of the lender's funding department. They're definitely talking to any type of insurance agent who may need to issue a binder on the property. If it's a house, they may be talking to an HOA representative. It's a condo and they need HOA documents. They may be calling an assessor's office for a tax update. I mean, so basically the title company is communicating with everybody. Okay. Is that how it's done in
Anybody as far as
Colorado?
anybody as far
Yeah.
as personal representative goes.
Yeah.
Anybody, attorneys from either side, they
Mhm.
all go through and they communicate with the title company, which sometimes that's really good.
Right. Yeah. Now, the title escrow and title companies actually have quite a bit to do. Okay. So the buyer's lender, who talks to the buyer's lender? Well, definitely the buyer, right? And definitely the buyer's agent talks to the buyer's lender. But it's often very, very common for the listing agent to communicate with the buyer's lender. Okay.
Yes.
Especially if you're a listing agent and you're getting all these offers, and maybe it's a multiple offer situation. Buyers encourage their lenders to call the listing agent to vouch for their client. Okay, so if you're a listing agent and you're getting 5 or 6 offers, you may be also getting 5 or 6 phone calls from those buyers' lenders to vouch for your client. And if you're a buyer's agent, it's a good idea, if you know that it's going to be a multiple offer situation, to ask that lender to call that listing agent and vouch for your client. Okay, and that's going to establish a connection between the lender and the buyer's lender and the listing agent. Okay, which is fine, because that listing agent, if they choose to work with you, they're going to want updates, and so they're allowed to actually call the buyer's lender and chat with the buyer's lender. Okay, the buyer's lender may or may not tell them everything. Obviously the buyer's lender is going to be discreet and communicate what needs to be communicated to the listing agent. They realize that. And so if you're a listing agent, it's okay if the buyer's lender communicates with you. Okay.
I noticed Joseph just sent a chat that said that when he calls the lender, sometimes he gets different information. And so that, I think, is really doing a service to your client in picking up the phone and making that call yourself. So I commend you on that, Joseph. And I understand that completely.
Elaborate more if you want me to.
Yeah. What did you say, Joe?
I said I can elaborate more if you'd like me to.
Yeah, we have a minute, really quickly.
Okay.
Yeah,
because whenever I represent the seller before I present the offer, a lot of times I will call the agent and then I'll call the lender. When the questions I usually ask: does the lender have all the paperwork in? Is there anything else you need from the lender before you can close escrow? And the agent will give me this, oh yeah, everything's in there, we're great to do. And then when I call the lender, oh, they haven't submitted any of their paperwork. That's a good example of why to call the lender. That's a quick
Exactly. Yeah,
example.
you're clarifying and you're definitely getting more information. I think sometimes one of our hats that we wear as real estate agents is detectives, right? Because we're
The second one is that often buyers, I get a lot of offers way more than what the buyer can qualify for, because they want to renegotiate down after they get in contract. But if you call the lender and go, wait a minute, they don't qualify for that much.
right. Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
and then you call the agent out on it, and you get an idea where that transaction is going to go. Because you don't want to be in a transaction as a listing agent and have the buyer just have everything fall apart and control the situation.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah, Fidel, go ahead.
The question is, who to talk to in the lending section? Who should you depend on? Should we depend on the loan officer, whatever he says, or there's anyone else beyond him that we should stay in touch with?
Well, I believe that you should depend on your lender, your loan officer that you're communicating with. Yes, that would be who you would be communicating with, because usually we don't have access to perhaps an underwriter or anyone else. However, I do want to say that say that you are working with a lender and the lender is becoming non-responsive and they're not replying to you, then it's definitely okay to try to find out who their manager is and escalate whatever it is you need to the next highest person in line.
I agree. There's typically a senior branch manager that will be overseeing the file as well. So if you have a difficult situation with the current loan officer, that you can always move up the chain.
Right.
But again, I try not to make too many phone calls, because then they kind of get irritated. So I think if you're just real clear, concise, get it to the one person that's a contact person, ask the question, and then leave it, instead of trying to do what I call the shotgun aspect, where you're trying to put it out there to 12 different people and then you don't typically get an answer any faster. So that's in my experience.
Right, I agree. And I think if you're waiting for an answer, no matter who you're talking to, you can ask your question and then maybe you can say, when can you get this answer to me? Kind of put a deadline on it, right? Tell them that you're waiting for them to reply to you. Okay. Appraisers, you guys, let's talk about who talks to appraisers. Well, basically, appraisers don't like to talk to anybody, which is not to say that they're not unfriendly, because they're friendly, but they don't like to be given any type of influence. You can't really influence an appraiser. They don't mind if you chat with them, but sometimes, depending, of course, on an individual, I'm not saying all appraisers are like this, but some of them definitely don't want to be asked any questions, because they got a lot of pressure since 2008, and there was a lot of new laws imposed upon appraisers and what they can and can't do. And so typically they like to, they don't like to be influenced, and realtors can't do anything to influence an appraiser. But what we can do is we can talk to them about details of the property. We can talk to them about local off-market comparable sales that they may not know about. We can talk to them about, the house next door got 12 offers. You can talk about local market conditions and stuff like that. So just in case you do come across an appraiser that appears unfriendly, just remember that they have certain restrictions on them as to like what type of information they'll take from real estate agents.
So Rebecca, if I can chime in real quick, in the state of Colorado, we used to not be able to communicate with appraisers, and nowadays appraisers are welcoming an appraisal packet, meaning if you want to leave a copy of your current market analysis on the table when they go into the house to do the appraisal, they are grateful for that and really do appreciate it. I think the problem is, again, nationally, I know we are short on appraisers. So, you know, they're so backed up on time that if we can help make their life a little bit easier, then it just goes and runs a little bit more smoothly, a little bit more amicable. And so that's what we have done in our marketplace and have had really good experience with it.
Right, I agree. I think that's a great idea. I do encourage anybody who is hosting an appraisal, or if you know that the appraiser is going to be there, it's a good idea to maybe bring a comparable package like that just to support your contract price. So, you know, I think that's a great idea. We can do that for sure. Okay, you guys, here's some practical stuff. We won't take forever because I feel like we're already going a little slow, but that's okay. And so these are your first steps when you have an accepted offer. Okay, this is what you do. The first thing you do is say congratulations, because that's exciting. You know, usually your clients are very excited when they have an accepted offer. And so here's part of our setting expectations and maintaining our professional standards is the very first thing that we should be doing is we should be sending them this congratulations, you're in contract. Here's your timeline of your contingencies, and here's your timeline for your close of escrow. And these are the next steps. This is what's going to happen now that you're in contract. And I feel that if we tell our clients what the next steps are, it really makes them feel calmer because they're not wondering. So they already kind of know what's going to happen and how, you know, the next step to go down to path of actually getting the deal closed. Okay, so if you are in the G Drive, I've already talked about this a lot at my Monday morning meeting, but I created this template. It's a Word document and it's called my next steps letter to a buyer. I loaded it. There's a link. I'm not going to click on it now, but when you guys get this presentation later, if you want to refer back to the presentation, you can do this. You can also go to your G Drive and you can Google this next steps letter to buyer. And then what you want to do is, I believe you can use it in Colorado. It's very, very standard. It's just a Word document that you download to your computer and then you edit it based on your own situation. And then you can use that to send that to your client. Okay. So I think that's really a really good practice to have because it just, if you do that every single time, it's one of those steps that kind of maintain your professional standards with all across the board. Okay. Second thing you want to do is you need to send that contract to the lender because, you know, the lender needs to get going on the rest of the steps for them, get the underwriting processed and get the appraisal ordered. And so as soon as you're in contract, you know, don't hesitate. Send that contract to the lender like right away. Okay, let them know of the deadlines and the timeframes and when if they have an appraisal contingency or if they have a loan contingency and when you need to close escrow, because they need to know all that stuff. Okay, you're also going to email the title company to introduce yourself introduce your client, and you're going to provide contact for everybody. And you're going to give the title company a copy of the purchase agreement and any other counter offers that they need to know about or addenda that they need to know about. Okay, so usually what I do, I say, hello title officer. My name is Rebecca. I'm representing these clients. These are my buyers. They're buying this property. I've attached the contract. You know, and sometimes I set out the deadlines for the title company. Also, I count the number of days, and so at the very least they know the closing date. Okay, so make sure you're kind of introducing everybody so everybody knows who everybody else is. When you're also introducing yourself to the title company, you're going to get instructions on how your buyer client is going to submit your initial deposit money. Remember, Radius Agent Realty does not take any checks at all. So usually your client will be wiring in their deposit money, or maybe they're writing a personal check, but they're taking it to the title company themselves. Okay, we do not take checks. We don't handle checks. We don't have a trust account log. That's the old-fashioned way of doing it. So just, you know, keep in mind, we don't have a trust account log. It's very important that we're not handling any checks. If your buyer wants to write a check for the initial deposit, that's great. Maybe you can have a courier pick it up from the title company. A courier might come and pick it up, or you can have them drop it off at a local branch of the title company or anything like that. But just remember, please don't take any checks. So then on the other side, your cooperating agent, whoever you're in the transaction with, that's your cooperating agent. You want to find out, are they using a transaction coordinator? And if they are, then, and you are using a transaction coordinator, then you want to make sure that those transaction coordinators are introduced to each other. Okay. And then you're going to go to the G Drive and you're going to tell us here at Radius Agent Realty that you have a new transaction. Okay, so you need to fill in the new file submission form. And send all your contract documents and any disclosures to your transaction coordinator. Okay, so it seems like a lot to do, but once you get into contract, these are definitely the next steps that you as an agent need to do to get that transaction rolling.
I
Okay.
typically will CC everybody and I do it all in one fell swoop. So when I'm sending the fully executed contracts, all the disclosures, everything, I'm sending it to the client, to the other agent, to the lender, to the title company, to my TC. So maybe I'm lazy, Rebecca, but I typically do that so that I know it's done.
Yeah, I agree. I do that also. I think, that way everybody has everybody's contact information. I set forth the dates of the contract, I set forth the lender contact info as far as the phone number and the email goes and the title company and maybe the escrow number, like it's all in my email. And I say, hey, everybody, we have a new transaction. These are my buyers. And that way the buyers also kind of know who everybody is too.
Exactly. Yeah. Thanks.
All right, let's do the next steps. Review the provided disclosures and reports again, schedule inspections. Okay, so what you need to do is take a look at what you've been given from the listing side. If they have given you what we call in California a full package, it's probably going to include all of the required disclosures that they prepared to give to everybody up front. Sometimes, however, they don't have a full package and they may be missing some things. And so you really want to take a look at what you've been given. You want to take a look at whether or not there are any reports or inspections that the seller has provided. Typical inspections and reports here in California may be like a pest report or a home inspection, maybe a roof inspection, maybe a sewer lateral inspection or fireplace, chimney, anything like that. So has the seller given you anything yet? All right. If they haven't, then you're going to want to talk to your clients and say, hey, what is it that you want to inspect? And so what I usually do is a tip. So I use the CAR form, which is the BIA Buyer Inspection Advisory Form. And it's part of the offer bundle in California. And it's that document that says, hey, these are all the things that you might want to consider investigating. Okay, so I'll talk to my clients and I'll say, hey, is there anything on this document, on this form that kind of triggers your desire to do any further investigations on any of these things? Okay. We go ahead and we assist the clients in scheduling inspections, and when recommending vendors, we always say that you should give 3 or more choices for home inspectors or termite pest inspectors, or even like vendors, any type of vendor, that you're using. Whenever you're recommending a service provider or a vendor to a client, you definitely want to give them choices. Okay. It's the reason we do that because
liability issues.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I may think this inspector is fabulous and has done a wonderful job for me and several of my clients in the past. And yet it might be the one deal that he drops the ball on or isn't as efficient or something. At least then my buyers can say, I can say, hey, I recommended, I gave you 3 people or 4 people or what have you. So yeah, it's all about liability coverage.
Right. Review the disclosures in more detail. Go over each form. Don't skip that part. Make sure that you've gone over each form with your client, and then you need to maybe email them. And if they don't want to go over each form, you can say to them, hey, in an email, you can write, did you read everything? Did you read every form? Do you have any questions? And let them reply to that, because now you have that evidence in your file that you've asked them, did they read everything, right?
Absolutely. And I know here in Colorado, we get so fast and furious sending things over with DocuSign that they sign it. And it's like, did you really take a look at that seller's property disclosure? Because it's sometimes a 5-page seller's property disclosure. So
right.
Good advice.
Right. Yeah. Compare what you've been given with the Radius checklist. We do have checklists, you guys. That's what we work from as far as our compliance and our TCs. We have checklists. If there's anything missing, if you don't have certain forms, For instance, in California, you need to have a transfer disclosure statement and a seller property questionnaire, and they need to be correctly filled out and fully filled out. Every single question has to be answered. Okay, if it's not, later on, that might be an issue, because you know, you don't want, if a listing agent, you want your seller to sign it all, have it all filled out, because you don't want the buyer's agent to come back and say, hey, you missed something, can you fill this out? And now you've got what might be considered new information. So same thing in California. Is there an agent visual inspection disclosure? And also, I always remind my buyer agents, please make sure to know whether or not there's a point of sale ordinance in that town or city where that property is. Especially in the Bay Area, it seems like every town has a different point of sale ordinance. Oakland's got sewer and sidewalk. You know, Marin's got, like, I don't know, a resale inspection, a sewer lateral. The city's got an energy and water compliance. I mean, it's just make sure that when you're selling real estate in that geographic area, that you know if there's anything that you need to be aware of geographically and locally. Okay.
Exactly, and that's the same in Colorado. The only one that I'm aware of that's different is up here in Fort Collins. We have a Fort Collins occupancy disclosure that some of our agents in Denver may not even be aware of. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Rebecca. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Let's do a really quick check-in before we go to the next slide. I just want to make sure if anybody has any questions, make sure you put them in the chat box, okay, so we can address them either now or then we get to the end. Okay, so that was our basic. Yeah, go ahead.
I had a question. It was before this slide.
Okay,
just really quick. You mentioned, do you CC your client, the buyer, when you are introducing yourself to the title and whoever else, or did you just said you send them a separate email?
I CC the buyer, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Because the title company is going to have to reach out to that buyer client in order to get certain documentation from them, maybe to verify their names, their identity. They're going to be needing some information from them about, like, perhaps how they want to take title eventually. And so, yeah, I'm definitely CCing my buyer client to the title company, because maybe the buyer will have questions about title insurance that I won't be able to answer. Then at least, you know, I could say, hey, you're welcome to reach out, call or email the title officer and ask them those questions about title insurance, right? And so, yeah, that's totally fine. Make sure they're all in communication. Is that good?
Okay, good to know. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so those were our kind of first steps, but now we're going to kind of shift into things to do once you're in your transaction, how you're going to work with your transaction coordinator, how the documents are going to flow, and then how to find some basic forms and checklists. All right. So during your investigations, you might find you're probably going to get questions, right? Like, say you're doing your home inspection and the buyer wants to know, you know, how does something work, or how does the irrigation work, or, you know, where does the mail come to, or anything that you find when you're doing your investigations. You want to keep a running list. Okay, you want to write things down. Okay, no matter how you do it, I'm old-fashioned. I write things down. I always have a piece of paper that I have with me that I'm writing things down that I notice that I need to do, whether it's reminders about inspections or just what I need to put on my AVID, anything like that. Okay, so definitely keep an ongoing list of questions that you might have. And you know, what's going to happen is, as you get close to removing your inspection contingency, assuming you have an inspection contingency, is, you know, you may want to have those answers. And so you're going to put those answers, put your questions into a list, send it over to the other side and let the seller answer those questions in writing. And then that back and forth, that question list and the answers from the seller, that actually becomes part of your file. Okay, and it's a lot easier to do your back and forth, and you know, it's easier to kind of maintain one solid list of things instead of sending an email one by one.
And
Right?
Rebecca, just to clarify, in Colorado, we have an actual separate contract form. It's called the inspection objections. And we have a deadline date that we have to submit that to the other side. But I too write down a little handwritten list and email back and forth with my client buyer so that we know some of those things that we're getting additional inspectors to come and take a look at. So for example, a roof inspection that maybe we need a 5-year cert on, those kinds of things. But yeah, it's the same in California, but just calling it a different document.
Yeah, exactly. They're all parallel stuff.
Mhm.
And so the other thing I wanted to point out, a lot of agents don't know this, but every transaction that you open here with Radius Agent that goes into SkySlope has its own email address. And so it's usually that address, some format of that property address at skyslope.com. And so your transaction coordinator can tell you what that email address is once they open up the transaction in SkySlope. And so it's really easy as an agent to include that email address and a lot of your important back and forth, because then that email goes directly into your file. Okay, so that's just a little trick. If you do have important things, you want to make sure that you add that to your transaction file. Okay.
Yes, and Andrea said that's a really cool benefit or cool feature, and I agree. I didn't know about that until just recently as well.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, if I'm just going back and forth about, hey, can I come to the property tomorrow at 4? Like, I'm not going to include that email address, but it's the important stuff for the file that I really think we should be including for that, into that. Okay. We definitely we require all acknowledged copies of reports, investigations, inspections, invoices, receipts that are mentioned or passed between both sides. We need to have acknowledged copies. And what that means is we need to have the buyer's signature on the front page. Okay. And that's going to be any kind of inspections or invoices or reports or anything like that. We need to have the acknowledged copy of that report. And so your TC is going to help you obviously get your signatures on these things. But remember, your TC needs to have all that stuff. If you're out there and you're getting a roof inspection, you need to submit it for the file. Okay. It's always the agent's job to track the status of the paperwork and to follow up promptly on any requests from our compliance department. It's the transaction coordinator is here to help you with the back and forth on the paperwork, but it's definitely the agent's responsibility to make sure that you are aware of where your paperwork is, like what you're missing, what you don't have, who's going after to get it. You know, it's fine if the TC requests things from the other side, but if it's something that's really important, like a disclosure document that you're missing, you as the agent really need to be aware of the status of your paperwork.
And again, Rebecca, just to interject that although some of those reports and investigations, receipts, those kinds of things are not required by our Colorado Department of Regulatory Services, it is a great benefit to have it all in one spot so that, and it's not a matter of if we get audited, it's when we get audited, we can grab all of that information. So it really is a major benefit.
Yeah, it is. I mean, just the more documentation you can keep, you guys, for the file is definitely CYA stuff, right? And then once you have a full file, then our demand department will prepare a commission demand. Okay, so I know that sometimes the title companies may say to you, hey, you know, where's your commission demand? And then you would be coming to your TC and saying, hey, I need the commission demand. You know, we are aware that you need a commission demand. We know that, but we definitely need to make sure that the file is up to a certain standard before we issue that. Okay, so if you're missing really important documents, we're not going to issue a commission demand until we know where those documents are in the process.
Well, and too, on that, just to remember that commission demands are not sent out so early that if by chance, and I think there's a question in chat here too, if by chance you're going back and forth and negotiating contract price per se, in lieu of doing some inspection repairs or replacement, that's going to change your commission demand figures. And so it's not a matter of that we're withholding it back from you all and not giving it to you immediately. It's that there may still be some things out there in the contract that are still in motion that we need to take a look at. And I know I'm looking here, Rebecca, somebody, Elizar Castillo had asked for further inspections. Who takes that cost and is that negotiated? And then Nick also says, can lending paperwork go into SkySlope?
No, SkySlope is not set up for lending paperwork, unfortunately. So that's going to be a no. Nick, we can chat a little bit more about that after. And then Elzar, for further inspections, who takes that cost? Is that negotiated? I think what we would look at first would be per the contract. did you ask for any negotiation? I'm sorry, did you ask for any inspections to be done according to the contract? And if we're talking about our CAR contract, then there are certain boxes that you can check to say who's paying for what. But if there's any further investigations or inspections, you know, that could become something that could be negotiated. Okay, so there's really not a yes or no or buyer or seller answer for that. I think it is negotiated. Yeah.
Rebecca, regarding the lender paperwork, we can upload the pre-approval letter though, right?
I think Nick is referring to mortgage lending transactions.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah, but you're right. We actually do require that you send in the buyer's approval letter. That is something that we want to upload into SkySlope. Yes. And so when you're sending in all your paperwork to your TC, you should be sending in the contract, the approval letter, the proof of funds, and then any disclosures that you've been provided at that point. Okay. Anybody have any questions? I'm going to move on. Here we go. Getting through investigations and contingencies. This is the fun part. Okay, you guys, because I think a lot of agents think that once they get into contract that the negotiations are done. Negotiations are done. That's it. You know, you got an accepted offer, negotiations are done. That's not true, because if you do have any type of contingencies, you definitely need to remember that you may need to have a second round or maybe even a third round of negotiations. Okay. And so what we do in California is if you do have a buyer's inspection contingency and you find things that you feel that you want to address, you can fill out this form that's called a request for repair form. And this gives the buyer the opportunity to ask for something, whether it's a repair, a price adjustment, a credit back in escrow, or anything else. This is a 3-part form, and this is one of my favorite forms because it's used a lot. I think we need to use it more, but it's one of those forms that goes back and forth a couple times. It's like what I call a vehicle form, because it's got the top section that says, hey, this is what I want, the buyer's request. And then it's got a middle section where it says this is the seller's response. And then it's got a third section at the bottom where the buyer agrees to the seller's response. Okay, so this form might go back and forth between the two parties, definitely more than once or twice or even 3 times. Okay, I can talk to you about how to handle a request for repair form. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you want to ask for things, please call me. I also have this link right here. Later on, if you want to check, you can go and click on that link and you can see this whole, I think it's like 7 or 8 pages from CIR about how to handle a request for repairs document. Okay.
And again, Rebecca, for us, that's the inspection, objection, inspection, resolution, or the inspection withdraw of objections. So we have the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the reason I think that I like this request for repair is because you can use it to negotiate for something. You can say, hey, I'm going to give you a contingency removal if you do this for me. Okay, so we definitely need to use that. Call me if you ever want to chat a little bit more about that, about how to get through requests for repair documents. Okay. We also have other things that might happen in a transaction that might require us to write up an addendum as an agent. And so a lot of agents will come to us as managers and they'll say, hey, I need to word something. How do I word this? How do I put this into writing for my contract? Okay. So in Colorado, this is what they do. You guys have pre-drafted clauses, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we actually purchased the additional provisions, clauses, contracts, or clauses package for that they were made from Frascona, Joyner, Goodman, and Greenstein, PC attorneys at law, and they are really kind of the gurus in Colorado. And so we already have those in a template that's just awesome because in one of our MLS systems, you can just download it. The other one, we have it in a Word form. So it really makes it quite informative and much more user-friendly to use those.
Right. I think that's great. We don't have any like standard clauses. So I think it does get confusing sometimes for California agents because they don't know how to word things. I think the longer you're in the business and the more transaction you do, you start to understand how to word things on your addendas. Okay, so but if you have any type of situation where you need help about how to say something, it's really important to make sure that you get a manager involved, because you don't want to put something into writing on an addendum that's going to become a legal document that could get us in trouble if it's worded wrong. Okay. And so in the G Drive, I loaded this drafted contract clauses practice tip. So if you ever want to go back, you can search the G Drive for that. Or definitely call a manager, okay? Because it's important to remember, if you're writing something on an addendum, that's a legal document, and you want to make sure that you're very concise and precise, and you really know whatever it is that you're writing, you're going to look at it from all angles about timing and who's doing what, and who's doing what, if they're licensed to doing repairs or anything like that. Just anything that has to do with an addendum, kind of out of the ordinary. Make sure that you're asking for advice on how to write that. And if necessary, we can run it past our company attorney if we need to.
And I also get several calls from agents to just say, hey, Amber, can you take a look at this clause? Because even if they're not using the exact clauses that we have provided for them, there's lots of continuing ed classes that also have the drafting clauses information. And so again, it's just better to kind of run it by somebody, take a look at it, and then go ahead and move forward with it. So I agree with that too.
Yeah. Our managers would much rather ask questions on the front end than try to resolve issues or problems that might come up on the back end. So here in California, one of the most important documents besides a contract is a contingency removal. Okay, so your contingency removal document is going to pretty much be required all the time. And of course, you have different versions. You can have number one, number two, number three, and then other little check boxes where you're checking off which contingency you're removing. Okay, we're going to go over that document in my contract class number 2. But the most important one is the contingency removal all. At the very bottom, it says all contingencies are removed. And so in California, that's what we're looking for. We want that contingency removal document for the file. Okay, even if you've gone through and you've done 1, 2, 3, 4 versions of previous contingency removals, and it looks like you've removed them all individually, we still want an all. We still want to have one that has the all box checked. Okay, right? Very important for our liability reasons. Okay. And do you guys do a contingency removal in Colorado, Amber?
We don't specifically have that form. I wish we did, because it sounds like it really helps clarify that everything has been met. But basically ours is just that we've met everything that has been designated in the contract.
Okay. And then one final reminder, you guys, if you have negotiated any type of credit or any type of price adjustment, don't forget to put that into writing on an addendum. Okay, in California, we're using the request for repair to make it happen, but then we're taking that agreement and we're putting it on an addendum, which we're going to give to the lender and the title company. Okay, especially if there's a credit or a request for a price adjustment.
Right. And I know lenders are very specific about having those items on the HUD statement, but also even if it's a cash closing, we suggest that it's there so that if anybody ever goes back and says, well, they never paid us for the fence that they were going to repair, they were going to give us a credit instead, I'd much rather see that on the settlement statement. So it's all clear to everyone involved in the transaction.
Right, right. So really quickly, I want to go up to the chat because I saw that Latasha had asked a question about how long after the close of escrow can we request signatures. So once escrow is closed, we typically don't chase down signatures, you guys. Okay, so that's really important. That's why our compliance officer is on us before the close of escrow. That's why they're strict about it. Okay, that's why you're getting these requests from the TC. That's why you're getting these reminders from the compliance department every Friday to please look at your checklist, see where you're at. Okay, we really, really need to have the important documents signed. We don't want to skip having a TDS in California, SPQ, contingency removal, AVID. So there's important things that we need to have for our files. If we ever get audited by the DRE, we need to have a full file or we're going to get in trouble. Okay, that's why we're very strict about it. All right, so if you come to a position in your transaction where you're asking for these things to be signed and the other side isn't cooperating and they're saying, hey, we don't require, our brokerage doesn't require that we sign your radius disclosures, or our buyer doesn't want to sign your radius, our seller doesn't want to sign your radius disclosures, or whatever. If you've asked for things a bunch of times and you're not getting a response, or you're getting, I'm sorry, I'm not signing that as a response, just that becomes part of the file. Okay, so make sure that you tell your transaction coordinator, and your transaction coordinator should say to you, hey, why am I not getting these things? And then if you say, well, I've asked for it 3 times in writing, and then okay, we're fine with that because we have evidence that we asked for it. Okay.
And I'm a stickler on that, Rebecca. If there's anything as per contract, Colorado buy and sell contract, I have my list from the Department of Regulatory Agencies. If those are not signed, I'm more than likely not going to sign the approval for the CDA.
Exactly. That's why we're on you about making sure that all your important documents are in so that we can sign the commission demand and get you paid.
Right.
Okay. All right, let's keep going. Let's keep going. Closing procedures and final steps. All right, so now you've gotten through your negotiations, you've gotten through your request for repairs, you've removed your contingencies here in California. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to do the final steps. And so usually 3 or 4 days prior to closing, the title company is going to ask for terms. Okay, so the terms is going to be coming from each agent. Those are the terms that the title company is reconfirming the terms of the contract to make sure that there has been no changes to the price, no credits, no, no situations where there's any type of rent back or any payments or anything. So when the title company says to you as an agent, says, hey, I need your closing instructions, otherwise known as terms, that's one thing. It's totally different than your commission demand. Okay. And so the title company needs these closing terms to put together your estimated settlement statement. Okay. Your estimated settlement statement is going to be that document that's going to say, this is your loan amount, these are your loan fees, this is your purchase price, and it's going to set forth all of the money items, who's paying who, the proration of property taxes, the proration of HOA dues, if it's a condo, maybe the buyer's buying a house, so they need to have yearly worth of policy of homeowners insurance on there. And so the estimated settlement statement is going to be this document that's going to have all the money line items for all these different things. And then at the very bottom, there's going to be what I call the magic number, which is the final amount of money that the buyer needs to bring to escrow before they will close. Okay. And so if you get that estimated settlement statement in advance, it gives you some time to review that, because you can make sure that all of your information and all of your dates are correct and all of your credits are correct. And, everything is on there is the way it's supposed to be. Okay. That's actually a standard of service. That's one of the things that as an agent, you should be doing every single time. Okay. Then in California, you're going to want to make an appointment with the title company to sign the final paperwork. And you're going to have to sign your final paperwork a couple days before the close date. Okay. Because the buyer's going to go in, they're going to sign their final paperwork at the title company. And then that final paperwork is going to go back to the lender, most likely in some form, whether it's hard copies or PDF or something. And then the lender is going to review everything to make sure that everything is correctly signed. And then the lender will push the button that sends their money to the title company. Okay, all of that has to happen before you close escrow. So you kind of have to look at your contract date and work backwards a little bit as to when you need to make all these things happen. Okay, if you are in California, I always advise our agents to try to go to the title company for the signing appointment, especially if you're representing a buyer. It's a really important step. It's a professional service that we provide as agents, going to the signing with our clients. Okay.
And Rebecca, I know we chatted about it, and real quickly, I wish we had all of those days prior to closing to get all of these things done, because unfortunately we're still kind of the wild west out here, I guess. Sometimes we won't get settlement statements until the day of closing, but it is one of those that you do have to go through and review those with your client prior to closing. So sometimes I'll step out of a closing room and say, hey, we need to go through this first. Make sure everything is appropriate and okay. And then we actually sign our final paperwork when we sit down for closing. So the closing date is that, unless it's been scheduled otherwise, and we'll have a separate closing, but that's not ordinary. That needs to be notified to all parties in advance, because out here, everybody assumes or pretty much is like, we typically do it all in one fell swoop one day. So those are things that we need to make note of. And again, it's good to know that other states do it differently. So if you have buyers or sellers from out of state, they may think, oh yeah, I'm coming from California, and they may be assuming it's going to be that same scenario that you just said. And yet I have to inform them here in Colorado, wow, we do things a lot differently. So that's our job too as professionals.
Exactly. Setting expectations, telling them what they need to do next or what to expect is going to happen next. Okay. One of the final things you need to do when you're closing out a file is making sure in California that you have the final verification of property condition. It's the VP form in our SIP forms, and we also call it the final walkthrough. Make sure you do one. Do not skip a final walkthrough. It is not a contingency of a contract here in California. It's more of a right of a buyer to do a final walkthrough. I just talked about this on our Monday morning meeting class. We had a situation where unfortunately one of our buyers' clients skipped the final walkthrough, and they went ahead and closed escrow, and now we're having issues with getting the tenant who was not supposed to be there at the close of escrow. And if they had done a walkthrough, perhaps they wouldn't have closed because the tenant hadn't moved out yet. So don't skip your final walkthrough. If the buyer decides to waive a final walkthrough here in California, they can do that. There's a little box that they check saying that they've waived it. But we as agents should be advising them in writing not to waive it. They should be doing it. Okay, very important. Yeah. Typically, when I do a final walkthrough with my clients, I'm doing it on the same day that they're signing loan documents. And so we're making a day out of it. We're going to go to the title company and we're going to sign loan documents, and then we're going to go to the house and do a final walkthrough. Or maybe we do the final walkthrough first, you know, whatever. But I try to do it the same day just to make sure that it's getting done. Okay. Review and sign your radius commission demand, which is then sent to title. This is how you get paid. When you sign your radius commission demand, make sure you're checking the information, check the amount, check your bank account routing number. Okay, check the information. Don't just sign it without checking it. Okay, want to make sure that that commission money is actually coming to you. And you want to also send your client a reminder about moving tasks, about, you know, turning on utilities, changing their address. We advise them to change the locks. Maybe you need to introduce the buyer to the property manager or the homeowners association, or any of these, like, you know, service providing. You're providing the service to your clients. You're basically saying to them, don't forget to do these things. Okay. And you're going to track the funding and recording process with the title company. The title company here in California usually will tell you that you expect to close escrow by, say, noon today. Then they'll call you and they'll say you're on record. And then which point then you can call your client and say, congratulations, you're on record. How can I bring you the keys? Okay. Now here we do that once again. It's a standard of service. You know, you want to be the one who's being proactive here, and usually it's the buyer's responsibility here in the Bay Area to go and pick up the keys somewhere and give them to your client that day that they close. Okay, you never ever want to give your client keys early before close of escrow. I've heard way too many horror stories. Okay, don't do it. Okay, not a good idea. Definitely for liability reasons, as a manager, I tell you, don't do it. Okay. And I think that was it. The title company will verify that the funding has been received and will send you the closing documents. Okay, let me check the chats while you go ahead, Amber.
Okay, I was just going to say, so in Colorado, we do that all in one fell swoop as well. So we actually sit and we wait for the title, for the closer to go and verify that we've received funds, that it has all funded. Then they will go back and they'll print closing docs and or send them to us electronically. And just because, again, we had a little snafu in one of our closings that we're still waiting for some documents to come through electronically, and they got stuck in electronics land somewhere. So I'm suggesting that all agents get electronic and hard copy closing documents just for that fact.
Right. Yeah. Now, why do we keep our closing documents, you guys? Does anybody know? I mean, like, I know once again, it's a level of service. We're going to get that final closing document and we're going to send it to our client. You know, the title company is probably going to send out a hard copy to the client as well. And especially if the buyer has any overpayment they'll get a little bit of a check for any overpayment from their funds. But they're going to get these documents in the mail. But I, as a buyer's agent, I like to send them the final closing statement as soon as I can, because it's once again, showing my level of service, saying, hey, you guys, here's your final closing statement. You're going to want to keep it for your taxes next year. Okay. And I remind them that it's an important document. They should keep it. Okay. Who is not muted? Can you guys make sure you're muted?
Also, I was going to say too that just because I'm in the process of transferring school districts with my son, sometimes schools will ask for proof of closing of the previous property to show that you're no longer living in that school district to move into the new school district. And so the settlement statement is something that they would want to see as well.
Right, exactly.
And I love Joseph's answer. When you asked, why do we keep them? He says, for the judge.
When I mentor and teach agents, I say everything that we put in our documents, how we write it, is not for our clients, is not for us, is not for the office, it's for the judge. Basically, if you hand your paperwork to the judge, you should just be able to keep your mouth shut.
Yeah, I know, you guys. That's why we're so focused on, having full files. It's all about liability right now. So need to make sure that you are just being aware of your liability and the fact that we need to have all this paperwork, just so super important for us to be in compliance. Believe it or not, the DRE does spot checks a lot. Okay, so that's why we're strict about it. Okay. Fidel says, does the law require that the buyer should receive the final closing statement 3 days before closing? That's a good question, Fidel. I think what you're asking is more regarding the mortgage lender disclosures. And you're right, it's the TRID laws. That's what Nick replied to. And so yes, as a mortgage lender, you have to give the disclosure to the borrowers, usually 3 days before they can sign anything. And so that's why it's important you as an agent, when you're working with your lender, that your lender is aware of the timeframes. Okay, because the lender also has to work backwards from that anticipated close date, and the lender has to get all of their stuff done on time too. Okay, so that's what the 3 days are. That's applicable to the lender's side. I hope that answers that. Okay, close of escrow. Great, you got paid. Guess what? You're still not done. Okay, so I used to, when I would close an escrow, I had this process that I called, decanting my file, okay, like pouring it all out, right? And so what I would do is I would say, okay, great, I just closed escrow, I got my commission check, I got the keys, or I gave the keys. And so now what am I going to do with that? Well, guess what? I still have all these tasks to do, because now I want to tell the rest of the world that I've just closed a transaction. And so you can use it to your advantage for all of your marketing. You can definitely put things out there about, congratulations to my wonderful clients who just bought this beautiful house, and, post that on social media. You always see people with their sold signs, right, on social media with their clients holding the big keys and stuff like that. I think if you do this type of stuff, you're showing the rest of your clients and the rest of your social media followers that you're an active, busy real estate agent, right? Okay, you're going to want to add your transaction to your personal income tracking sheet. If you're tracking your own income, definitely track of that. Make sure you have that client on all of your past sales list. Add them to your database. Deliver a closing gift if applicable, if you're the kind of agent that does closing gifts. You definitely want to go in there and ask for testimonials to that client. And I want to pause for just 1 second and say the best time to ask for a testimonial is be right before they're closed, when they're in that happy zone. Okay, and they're like just signing their closing documents and they're excited, right? That's a great time to ask for your testimonials. Okay, because once they close escrow, guess what? They're busy moving, and they don't think about writing testimonials once they've closed escrow. So try to time that request for asking for your testimonials to do it sometime when it's kind of like right before they're closed, when they're excited. And then they'll hopefully write you a wonderful testimonial. Okay. And then you're also going to want to send out your thank you notes. Don't forget your thank you notes. They go a long way. Okay. I remember agents that I've worked with in San Francisco now, and every time I see them at brokers tours or to go out and show one of their properties, I love working with them because those are the agents that, sent me maybe a nice small bouquet of flowers or a bottle of tequila or whatever, but if you've had a particularly, hard transaction and you've been working well with that agent, or even if you haven't, I mean, a thank you note is really a wise way to build bridges with your colleagues. Okay. All right, let's keep going. We're almost done. We're going to talk a little bit about maintaining our professional standards. And so I want to just kind of put this out there, and Amber and I will go through this together. Always remember that it's an agent's job to guide and explain, but not to make decisions for our clients. Okay, so sometimes I will tell my clients, hey, these are the pros, these are the cons, and I'll guide them and I'll explain them, but ultimately it's the client's decision, right? And so just kind of be aware of that. Clients are always going to try to get you to give your opinion. We can have an opinion, that's great, but just remember, no tax advice, no legal advice. We have certain limits as to what we can actually tell our clients about certain things, and just try to guide them and give them the information that they need to make that decision. Okay.
And I have found too over the years that even though I'll say, please be sure and consult your attorney or ask your tax consultant, they don't hear it. So I just had a big investment transaction, and I had a gentleman say, well, how come we didn't do a 1031 on this? Well, the good news is I have documentation that we had sent to them saying, please be sure and check with your tax consultant prior to this closing. So again, that's part of us upholding that professional standard. So it's a nice way to say, I told you, instead of saying it that way. So, but it's like, do you remember I did send out that information sheet that had those 3 people on there, those 3, CPAs that I suggested you contact if you didn't have your own. So those kinds of things, again, you just get in the practice and it just makes things go much more smoothly.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good segue into the next bullet point. Stay calm. Even if situations get heated, sometimes the best response isn't your first gut reaction response. Take time to think before you react. Okay. Agents are sometimes going to be perhaps not very nice or difficult to get along with, or they'll push our buttons somehow. Same thing with clients. But I mean, just always remember, stay calm, and, don't react. Don't react to something. If you find yourself, getting frustrated, maybe take a step back, give yourself a minute, take a breath, do whatever. But, if you fire off an email that you later regret, that's really hard to go back from. So just always remember that, try to get along, everybody, stay calm. I had this agent actually in a transaction just a couple of months ago. She kept pointing out to me things that my sellers should have done. And my sellers didn't get a pest report. My sellers didn't get a home inspection. They should have done that. And I kept saying to her, well, they just didn't want to. They didn't feel like they wanted to. But by the 3rd time, when she reminded me that, my sellers should have done it another way, I felt like I wanted to say to her, well, I told you they didn't want to, but I didn't say anything. I just let it roll off me, right? Even though, she had mentioned it 3 times, I was like, well, whatever, so it's our job to be that buffer. That's our job, right?
Yeah.
There may be.
I was just going to say, that's where I always remind myself. I was told one time that duct tape is silver, but silence is golden. So I have to remember, I just, stop for a moment, and then I'll pick up the phone and I'll call somebody else. And, Rebecca, I've called you a couple of times as well. And if I need to do the anger, oh my gosh, I can't handle this, or I call it the snot cry if I'm upset, because it's an emotional business. But I have I have my allies that I can do that with, my safe zone, so that it doesn't come across that way to my clients, and or especially the other agent on the other end, or any of the vendors we're working with as well.
I don't mind if you call me and you guys want to vent. I'm fine with that.
Exactly.
I'll commiserate with you all day long. Okay. I think I wanted to open a website once that was real estate psychological advice, because I say I'm getting paid a commission, but I'm not your psychoanalyst. But whatever. I mean, vent to your colleagues if you're going to vent. Okay. Don't vent to your clients or the other agent.
Exactly.
Okay. anticipate speed bumps. There may be speed bumps along the way. Be able to anticipate problems that may arise so that you can avoid them. Okay, and the more experienced you get, the more you tend to kind of be able to anticipate the problems that might arise. But you always want them to be forward thinking. If this happens, then that might happen, or if this doesn't happen, then that might happen. So just try to always anticipate if there's going to be something that may happen. You may have the smoothest transaction all the way through, and then you get to close, and guess what? There's a speed bump. Okay, so just realize that that's going to happen. I usually train my buyer's agents, and I say, hey, there's probably going to be something that's going to come up that's going to be a big deal. Don't know what it's going to be, but there's probably going to be a speed bump or two along the way. And so just, try to be calm and, figure it out as you go. Okay. This is a fun one. Be careful with replying all on your email chains. Okay. Don't just forward your emails. Sometimes it's not the best way to handle things. So I had this agent I was working with for a while back, many years ago, and we had this long email trail chain that was happening, and we were passing it around. It started to get heated, and this agent actually called her client a name in writing, and unfortunately, that became a really long chain, and somehow that client got added later, and he was able to read the whole chain of email. Okay, so be really careful with your emails. Be really careful with your reply all emails. Sometimes forwarding a response from the other side is not the best way to communicate with your clients. Okay, because we don't want to just be that person who's just passing the buck, right? We're here to kind of prove our value, right? And so if we're just merely forwarding emails, that's really not, proving our value. Okay. I want to say sometimes it is okay to forward email responses. If it has a material fact or a direct question, then sure, forward that. But don't be just an email shuffler. Okay. All right. Don't overshare. That's another one that I think agents kind of they realize as they get more experienced, is that sometimes you don't need to be relaying a detail or a problem that's happening. You don't need to be giving that information to your client immediately, because you could perhaps resolve that problem really fast, or you could look into it deeper and try to figure out how to do something about it before you get everybody upset about things. Okay, so just kind of keep in mind, if you get some sort of bad news or something, a speed bump, say, try to figure out why it happened, what you can do to fix it, and can you fix it before you even really need to tell anybody about it. Okay, so I don't know, Amber, how do you feel about that?
Well, I agree, because sometimes, even in my experience, I'll think, oh my gosh, that's a terrible situation with this contract. This is going to throw the thing overboard, what have you. And then when I tell my client about it, they go, okay, not a big deal.
Yeah.
And now I've just created all of this negative chaos in my own head over something, because each client individually is going to have their own situations of what's a big deal and what's not.
This is true.
So, for example, if we had asked that it be professionally cleaned prior to closing, and they go, oh, that's okay. My sister-in-law cleans houses for a living.
Right.
Okay, great. It could be something as simplistic as that I'd be going like, oh my gosh, I've got to find somebody now and get this taken care of, and think I'm being the good realtor to get it done. And it's a non-issue. So I think that to be sure that we just let people know the facts, and what is it?
Yeah.
They say just the facts, ma'am, right?
Yeah,
So,
this is true.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I agree. That's true. You're right. Never know how they're going to react, and we don't want to keep things back, obviously.
Right.
You always want to document your conversations with clients, especially if they were particularly difficult conversations. Put it in writing, okay? And you always want to reach out to a manager if you need any help navigating any situation. And finally, don't count your chickens until they're hatched, because it's not about the money. It's actually about doing a good job for your client. And I always felt that if I counted my commission before the transaction closed, or even before contingencies were removed, that I was somehow jinxing myself. Okay, so don't focus on the money part of it. Okay, the money part of it is great. Yes, we like to make commissions, but in reality, we really need to be focusing on our client and doing the best job we can.
I think that's really important, Rebecca, because if all of a sudden I'm more worried about my commission and what I'm making, then I'm not really doing a service for my clients. I'm looking at it like, oh, we have to make this contract stick. We have to get this to closing, because I'm more worried about the big check that I'm getting versus saying, what is this really about? I'm helping these people get into a home, or I'm helping these people sell their home so that they can move on. So I agree with you on that one.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we're almost done. Common negotiating tactics. This is a fun stuff, you guys. This is a fun one. This is a good slide. First of all, be nice, okay? You and the other agent are on the same team. You're not going into battle. Don't be argumentative, combative. Instead, you want to seek to understand. You want to ask the right questions, like why something is important to the client or agent, and you want to be collaborative in figuring out how to resolve things. Okay. Don't be that agent who refuses to help or refuses to do anything to try to help. I once was representing a buyer, and we were doing our final walkthrough, and I said, hey, I said to the listing agent, can you please make sure that that light bulb in the ceiling is replaced? And he was like, nope, not going to do it. And I was like, really? And in front of my buyer client, he refused to do it. And so the next time I went over the next day with a ladder and a light bulb, and I did it, right? But of course, what do you think my client remembered? My client remembered what a jerk that listing agent was about a light bulb. Okay, so don't be that agent. Try to definitely be nice and be collaborative and work together to get things done. Okay. We talked about this before really briefly, but Amber mentioned earlier, talk about things, definitely, you want to have a conversation. Conversation is going to create that back and forth. It's going to be a much friendlier back and forth, hopefully. Texting and email is not the best way to communicate, especially if you're communicating about things that are important, or, perhaps if things are getting heated, try to communicate in writing. And then if it goes really south and it becomes that that you aren't able to actually communicate verbally, then yes, take it into writing, okay? Because you need to document your responses. But if you can get along first, try that route first, okay? Always ask for more than you expect to get. Okay, so say that your buyer was saying like, oh, it's going to cost me $5,000 to do the roof repair. And you could, perhaps ask for 10. Okay, so you always want to bracket, what you're asking for. Like try to ask for a little bit more, because then maybe the seller will be responsive and say, okay, I'm not going to give you that much, but I'll give you this much. Make them think that yes was their idea. Okay, so you can start out by saying, well, you're probably going to refuse, but this is what the buyer is asking for. Or you may not like this, but this is what the buyer would like to do. So if you kind of word things in such a way where it's giving the other side the opportunity to say yes, that's a much better way than being demanding of a yes. Okay. Make it a win-win situation, meaning like, what can you give them in exchange for what you're asking for? Okay, so sometimes maybe it comes down to appliances, or maybe it comes down to leaving something like the garden tools or something like that. I mean, if there's a lot of going back and forth on who wants what, you can try to make it a win-win so that you're both finding that common ground so that both your clients, your buyers, and your sellers are happy at the same time. Right? Use the request for repair form. We already talked about that. I like this because this is a form that you can do something in exchange for something. So I find that's really helpful in negotiating. And in Colorado, you guys do what? Inspection objection?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Let me check the chat really quick. We're almost done. Yes, you'll be able to review this class, Fidel. No problem. All right. All right. Almost done. Handling objections. So this is what I say to my clients when they come to me and they're like, oh, we have concerns. We have this list of things that we are looking at this property and we're not really sure. And now we're being hesitant. And my first thing I say to them is like, is any of this going to keep you from buying this house? And yes, if so, then what's the most important, on a scale of 1 to 5, or let's rank these things that are most important to you. And then we can chip away at the objections and we can try to figure out, okay, well, maybe number 5 isn't as important as number 1. So let's just focus on asking for something that will resolve number 1. Okay. You can also go to the other side and you can say, or you can say to your client, and if they do this, then will you do that? Okay, that's a back and forth, like a negotiating factor. You can use the fear of missing out. You can say, well, if you don't remove contingencies, or if you're not happy with this property, then you're going to have to go back out and keep shopping. Other people might get the opportunity to buy it. And so, is that what you want? Do you want to have to keep shopping? You may not find another house that you like as much. You've been shopping now for a year, and this is the first one you really like this much. Do you think that all of these items are going to keep you from buying this house? And then you could also use the making life easier strategy, which basically says, well, think about this. If you buy this house, your life will be so much easier because your job will be right down the street. You won't have to commute every day from like 30 miles away. Or, you really like this property because you can walk to town. That makes life so much easier. And so these are just some kind of simple ways to handle objections.
So one of my biggest things that I keep in the forefront whenever I'm coming across any speed bumps and objections, what have you, is I try to think about that client or even the other agent or the seller that's on the other side. What's their why? Like, why are they buying this house? Why is my buyer, why does she want to buy this new condo? What's her motivating factor, so that I can remember that, I always say that, if you can get 3 out of your top 5 items that you really want in a property when we're going to look at it, that we've really created a win. And so if I can remember what their why is and what's their number 1 motivating factor, like what is it behind them wanting to purchase a property or for them to sell the property, because that's what's going to be their drive. And a lot of times it's emotionally charged. And so if I can kind of keep that in the back of my mind of, okay, you know what, this is a safety hazard. Her daughter does have lung issues. You're absolutely right. We need to ask for a radon mitigation system to be installed in the basement. I mean, some of those things, then what the real why is, and you can understand, how important that objection is. Or if it's simple, like, what, somebody messed up the whole garden and all the flowers are all messed up. I have a gardener I can call on speed dial. That's not a problem. So
yeah, no, great. I love knowing everybody's why. That's great. And that's definitely, how to kind of chip away at what people are after, for sure. So okay, you guys, look at it. I think this is our last slide. And so what we want to finally leave you with here is just, I know this was a lot of information. We hope that it was some good practical advice kind of combined with some next steps and stuff like that. But if you have any questions about how to work with your transaction coordinator, remember that we do have this transaction coordinator service level agreement that you probably signed when you onboarded with us, and you can search the G Drive, and it basically sets forth some of the tasks that our TCs do for us here at Radius. And so I know that the relationship between an agent and a transaction coordinator is very important, so that everybody knows what to expect from each other and what's getting done and how you're communicating. So what I recommend is, definitely try to get to know your TC a little bit. It's always good to have a conversation if you're kind of new with your transaction coordinator, to set expectations, have a friendly conversation, figure out, if you can confirm how everybody works, and who's doing what, just to make sure that you're on the same page. Okay, your TC is not your secretary. Okay, they do help with exchanging and facilitating paperwork and getting signatures, right? Ultimately, it's the agent's job to kind of track everything, but you really need to have that kind of good rapport with your transaction coordinator. Okay, if you can call me if you ever have any questions about, how to get along or what to do with your TC. If, we're still obviously putting into place here some things at Radius as far as, expanding our TC department and, getting our compliance straight and everything like that. But it's really important. I understand that, getting along with your TC and working with your TC is really important. Okay. For transaction questions, of course, you can always call me or Amber. But here in California, a really good place to go and look for questions or answers to questions is if you go to your CAR transaction tools, and then you go to your transaction center, and then you go to risk management, and you click on the legal questions and answers, and it brings up this category. It's like all these questions and answers, and it's categorized, okay, by, you know, contract or commissions or teams or leases. And so you can go to the category and you can find, hopefully there's going to be a brochure, an advisory from CAR written about your question. Okay, so that's a really good place for California agents to find additional information, or call me and I will help you with that.
And just in the final statement here, I know for our Colorado agents, one of the most important and helpful forms that we have is the transaction file checklist. And I have that. And again, on our Monday Colorado Connection meetings, it's really a great place for us just to informally connect. I can bring forth information for you, and you can also bring forth information for the rest of us, and also bring forth any questions that you might have. Happy to take that. We have a legal line that I actually do call every week asking questions, and that's set up through our board of realtors. But again, anytime you guys have questions, please feel free to call, text, Slack, email. Happy to help.
That is what we are here for, you know, making sure that we are answering questions and helping you guys get your transactions done and successfully closed, okay, without getting sued, right? That is it. This is our final closing slide. Thank you for joining us. Please follow us on social media. These are some hashtags that if you are a social media person, you can be using this radius, hashtag radius agent and hashtag radius win to tag us, follow each other, please, and go on to social media and you know, kind of keep up with your social media accounts. If you need to update anything, please do so.